Anthem, as a game of any type, is no gem, but it absolutely should have been. Sadly, this game has been murdered, slain, and brutalized in every way. While I feel that many reviewers were incredibly harsh on the game and therefore contributed to a lot of the negativity surrounding it, there is no question it is the developers who, like the Romans, are responsible for crucifying Anthem. It is an unjustified death of a game that had so much potential. My name is Adore, and today we're going to answer the question of what really happened with Anthem. Following the mixed reaction to Mass Effect Andromeda, which is the last iteration of Mass Effect that BioWare has worked on, these seasoned developers had a new IP in the works, and it had apparently been in development prior to the game that would later become a staple in the genre of looter shooters called Destiny. Anthem was clearly set up to succeed, with a hungry and passionate fan base, and coming in with a sci-fi theme like Destiny, but offering a third-person perspective, much like The Division. It had a very unique offering to bring to the table. There was a lot of speculation that Anthem would be a Destiny or even Warframe killer, given that it was coming from BioWare, which were masterclass storytellers, and that was one of the things that the genre was sorely lacking. On top of this, BioWare had given everyone a really wonderful idea of what a great combat system was with its critically acclaimed Mass Effect series. It really seemed like this was going to be a dream come true for the genre. Fans of BioWare were sure that Anthem would come with an intricate and excellent story, with great writing as well as a very interesting universe. BioWare's games had been lengthy in the past, so the idea that the game would launch with very little content and little to no endgame was something that was very far from fans' minds at this point. Unfortunately, something has gone incredibly wrong, and we now have all the answers to the questions we had about this game. Anthem is an absolute mess, and as a great defender of it, I have to say my enjoyment has started to wane. I really want to love Anthem, but unfortunately, the game is launched in such a state, with bugs and even loot problems at this point, and developers just seem to make decision after decision, and it's just wrong. So, it's very difficult to defend the game right now, and I find the whole thing just so disheartening. So, let's start from the beginning. When Anthem released, it was pretty apparent to everyone that the story was pretty well done, but certainly not even remotely close to any of BioWare's previous work. While there are a bunch of different mission types, they all end up being incredibly generic in execution. I really did try to defend this, but unfortunately over time, seeing as the contracts themselves and everything else that's been added into the game really do not seem to make much of a difference in changing it, it's quite amazing that the mission system would function so similarly to Destiny for a game that honestly had nothing to do with its development. The missions, put simply, are just not fun, and despite the fact that I still believe the combat in this game carries it, over time, after putting in what I have at this point, which is about 150 hours, I'm not exactly done with the game, but I'm waiting for something to come along to really shake things up before I can really feel all that much enjoyment from it anymore. Anthem has launched in a state that is absolutely inexcusable, especially for a hardened developer like BioWare. The bugs in this game are worse than most games that you've probably ever played, and they seem to just get worse and worse as you continue playing and sink more and more hours into this disappointing experience. This will hurt the enjoyment of even the biggest fan of the game considerably. Whether it's getting stuck in an area in a dungeon where you're completely locked off from the rest of your squad mates, being forced to then go to the map screen, exit the game, and then have the issue happen over and over again on the same stronghold every time you try to spawn in, or having issues with the loot where you end up in a certain area of the dungeon and your hard-earned loot is now locked off by an invisible force field. The game's bugs just pile up, but the problems don't even remotely stop there. Anthem has a very real and major problem for any game, but especially one in this genre. A lack of meaningful content, and what is here is sparse when compared to even the weakest games in this genre. Once you beat the game, there's literally almost nothing you can do. You have 3 dungeons available to you, fighting each of the main enemy factions in Anthem over and over and over again, just like any looter shooter. That was expected, but one thing you really can't do is play any of the story missions again. The one thing you could do to sort of alleviate this is choose a random mission to play and hope that it's one of the main story missions, since these have more variety and interesting concepts than the few contracts you'll end up playing ad nauseum. But that's it. There's really very little here, and amazingly, having said earlier that the game took 6 years to develop, this simply makes no sense. I was actually in college for 3D modeling work, and one thing I can say is that I have many times thought of how to develop a game of my own, and with regard to what any game needs to launch with, the content offerings here are just absolutely abysmal. There is so little to do, and with games like Division 2 and others coming out so soon after Anthem's week launch, offering significantly more content and higher mission variety overall, you have so little reason to return to Anthem at this point. And the problems don't even stop here. BioWare's developers just keep making mistakes, and it's why you can't blame this on EA. You have to blame the developers, who, to their credit, are owning the problems with Anthem daily on Reddit. It's their problem, and they either need to fix the game or they're going to die in this gaming climate. Perhaps it's slightly unfair. The other games like Destiny and The Division were given chance after chance to fix the problems that those games launched with. However, why allow for such an excuse? Everyone was following these games, including those who were working on Anthem during this time. They didn't live under a rock. They had every opportunity to see the mistakes of other developers and improve their own system to ensure that such issues did not plague their own launch. There is simply no way to excuse anything that's going on here, as the problems don't even make rational sense. So, they tried to fix their loot problems recently, and every time they've done this, the patch that they've released has had a small window of a few hours or so where people have had increased drop rates, which is something that almost everyone is clamoring for at this time. If you're at all a fan of the Diablo series, then you're more than aware of how Blizzard fixed the bad launch and subsequent months following Diablo 3's release, by literally raining legendary items and high-tier loot upon their players. Great items in Diablo 3 drop all the time now, and the game has had a second wind that has gone strong even despite Blizzard's most recent failings with a Diablo-themed mobile game. I'm intimately accustomed to this kind of loot system, where legendary weapons and items are not the end goal, rather min-maxing and theory crafting is. Anthem needs this, and fast, as fans are already spending time, and days even, without any sense of progression at all. Myself included, of course. Again, this is a misstep that could have easily been avoided by taking the time to do even a modicum of release on the examples of looter masterpieces like Diablo and Borderlands. Speaking of Borderlands, that game not only nailed loot, even despite my hatred of constant inventory management, but also has the best writing and story content probably ever devised for a looter shooter. Yet, I see very few people talking about it. Curious. When you defeated a boss in Borderlands, it was like the apocalypse took place, as loot of every color and tier scattered across the battlefield. This was super satisfying and a big staple of what made the Borderlands games so beloved by fans. Going deeper into Anthem's loot problems, there honestly are not that many different options available for building a unique character class right now in the first place. Nothing on par with any of the Mass Effect games, not even the earliest one. Given the various races with special passives and abilities, and the branching paths that a player could take in deciding what they wanted to do for them in combat. Further compounding this issue is that Anthem had to release a patch recently that fixed inscriptions, as some of them were offering bonuses to items that did not even match the item they dropped on. A sniper damage bonus might drop that only applied to an autocannon? What a ridiculous oversight. Another issue that still plagues this game to this day is that lower level items are doing more damage to enemies, and so removing powerful items from your javelin loadout actually makes you more adept in combat. What a joke! It's almost as if the game wasn't even tested, despite the alpha and 2 demos, or betas, I should say, that I had access to. Javelins have health and shields, but from day one it was assumed and later confirmed to be the case that these were bugged, leading to issues that I also experienced where I'd just get decimated in one mission, only to speed through another largely unscathed. It's so inconsistent. The idea that Anthem was in development for 6 years is so hard to believe, given the myriad of problems that seem to color almost every feature and detail of this game in a depressing shade of gray. What isn't broken about Anthem? The combat is very fun, even more so than Mass Effect, in fact, given the new movement mechanics on offer and the world that's large and beautiful, as I stated many times on the channel. The story was also pretty good, but BioWare, given their experience, was capable of delivering Borderlands quality to its story and world design. There has been a lot of talk about how the game was downgraded from what we saw years ago at E3. Having watched the various videos that people have made on YouTube comparing the final game, I am inclined to agree with them. What we have at launch is beautiful, but not at all what we were originally promised. Not in terms of quality or scale. To their credit, they've been very open with the community and release patches regularly and at a decent clip to try and make their fans happy. This is definitely a good step. Now, this analysis would be horribly depressing and pretty useless if I didn't offer solutions for how BioWare can fix their game, so here are my thoughts on saving Anthem. BioWare needs to reverse course right now and set up their loot system to function in such a way that mirrors the small window of increased drops that players have enjoyed each time the game has been patched. They need to immediately work on fixing any other game-breaking issues that are preventing players from progressing missions, Anthem's equivalent of Destiny's Strikes called Strongholds, or any of the various legendary contracts. These bugs have been very problematic in the last few weeks and have rendered the random mission option practically useless. Going forward, they need to speed up development on additional strongholds and other endgame activities. A stats screen needs to be implemented so that people can truly ensure whether removing or adding items is helping or hindering their combat experience. Whatever raid the developers have planned needs to launch in a state that does not have game-breaking issues or problems preventing players from attaining sought-after loot, as anything short of this will likely be the last nail in the coffin for Anthem. The developers then also need to overhaul loot and offer way more options for unique playstyles rather than the handful of options that we currently have available. Swapping grenades and other special abilities like elemental attacks, you'll find right now that there are very few offerings, and many of those abilities function so similarly that it will hardly change up your class. Difficulty needs to be reworked and AI tweaked to be smarter and take way more advantage of each of the factions' specialization. I'm working on a video to elaborate on this aspect of Anthem and other games, so look forward to that video very soon. What I will say right now though is that Devil May Cry 5 released a few days ago, and I have a review for that on my channel. The difficulty options available in that game are exhaustive and challenging. Rather than turning all of its enemies into bullet sponges, DMC changes up enemy composition, changing whether enemies you encounter show up in certain areas and the number of which you have to defeat to progress its winding levels. This already would go a really long way to bring back the favor of fans for BioWare, but Devil May Cry also adds new special form changes for its enemies if they're backed into a corner and take too much of a beating, as well as additional attack patterns for enemies and bosses. Rather than simply buffing enemies at higher difficulties could have special armor or different shields. Maybe they take extra damage from fire but have a bit more resistance to other attacks. Perhaps they become immune to firearms at certain points and need to be carefully burned down with elements. They could get a damage and health buff when next to other units but become a lot weaker when separated. This would force squads to pull them away from each other to succeed. The ideas you and I could likely come up with are endless, and yet hardly a single one has been included or implemented in the game thus far. These kinds of difficulty changes are absolutely achievable, and some of them are things that BioWare has already done in their past franchises. Difficulty is probably one of the most important things that needs changed, as current gameplay in Anthem often involves brain-dead enemies standing around, hardly even engaging players. This isn't fun, and also speaks to another issue, which is level and mission design. Offering such a robust and exciting new combat and movement system should have carried development into creating levels and dungeons that took advantage of these unique offerings. They simply don't, and it's an incredible shame. We fly around, and yet this is never used to fight some mothership enemy in the skies above the world, or even used to navigate obstacles in levels or avoiding epic attacks from bosses. Swing and a miss. I would personally like to see movement sped up in Fort Tarsus to something akin with Destiny or Warframe, and if not completely reworked to be third person completely, it really needs to offer me the option to change that. It's disorienting to come out of hours of third person combat and then be thrust into slow, meandering FPS movement for such a throwaway section of the game. Fort Tarsus is not a great space in its current state. It is probably the worst hub zone in any game I have ever played. I appreciate the well-delivered lines from the various voice actors playing the characters around this space, but the whole experience makes me feel dead inside. The world map is interesting, and I have a lot of fun flying through caverns and diving underwater, but for some reason, like so many other aspects of the game, the developers failed to include waypoints and map markers. If you die while doing one of Anthem's many world events, you'll likely awake feeling discombobulated and confused as to where on earth you just were and how you can get back there. Actually, if you've played as much of the game as I have, you'll probably just shut off the game, and sadly, that is where I am at. Anthem needs a resurrection from the dead. It has spent more than 3 days in the grave, but a gaming miracle is certainly still on the table. Well, that's my video. I hope you really liked it. Please comment your thoughts down below so I can hear all about what you think. And if you liked the video, click the like button. But if you didn't, there's always a less happy button you can click. But you wouldn't want to click that and do bad things to me now, would you? Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell. The button's right over there somewhere. Because if you don't ring it, then you won't hear from me very often. Sad face. Please share this video everywhere, and as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Okay, bye-bye.